Joe Los. I'm the executive director and founder of the ToonSeum. The ToonSeum is Pittsburgh's Museum of Cartoon Art. It was founded 4 years ago, originally part of the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, which kind of stunk. Because the Children's Museum is a great children's museum, but it's for 4-year-olds. And we discovered that our audience were, 30-year-old single guys who didn't like going into a children's museum by themselves. And I don't blame them. So we moved to downtown Pittsburgh into the cultural district and have our own building there. We just expanded. We were originally a very small gallery of only about 1,500 square feet. We're now expanded to 5,000 square feet. Wow. We just named our new gallery after Lou Scheimer. Now, Lou Scheimer, you'll see a lot of his work in these presentations. Lou Scheimer was the founder of Filmation Studios. And Lou was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's in his 80s. He came back, and he actually cut the ribbon with He-Man's Power Sword. So that was really cool. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the history behind Saturday morning cartoons. And there's going to be a lot missing out of this. A lot of your favorites are missing out of this. It is based on two things. Ones that sort of are representative of a particular genre in Saturday morning cartoons. So I tried very hard to put things that had a historical significance. And the other thing is based on is what I could find on YouTube. So with those two things in mind, bear in mind the quality may not be the best on a lot of this, but there was a lot of stuff that's very hard to find.
Some of it wasn't high quality.
Yeah, a lot of it wasn't high quality when it was produced. So Saturday morning cartoons really began when Van Buren was a small animation company, much less well known than Disney or Fleischer Brothers, but they had a pretty good backlog of cartoons. And so they put together this show called Small Fry Theater. And what they did was they packaged this all together and threw it on TV, whoever would buy it. It wasn't on Saturday mornings, but it was the first time cartoons had been appearing on television. And it was really based out of one thing. It was cheap. They had all these cartoons out there, so why not just package them together? You could buy them for next to nothing and just run them on TV. There was very little programming. So that's where it sort of began, was just taking prepackaged stuff. They would add a clown, a wrestler, stranger and stranger people to host the children's shows. Whoever was well known in that community would actually host the children's show, would do a little bit of banter, and then show a cartoon. But it was not yet Saturday morning cartoons. The first cartoon produced specifically for television is the one we're going to watch a short clip of right now. And by the way, I'm going to try as much as possible so whole clips, so we'll actually get a chance to watch these cartoons. And that was Crusader Rabbit. Crusader Rabbit was 1949. And it was also significant, it was one of the first shows to syndicate. So it was not on any one specific network, it just ran wherever people would pick it up. And the one thing you'll notice watching this is, it is very, very limited animation. It is more of an animatic than it is an animation. In other words, they took a storyboard and just put it all together. You'll also notice, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, the narration, because it's really important and significant to cartoon. So here we go with Crusader Rabbit.
They're still talking about the little rabbit that had come down from the United States to wipe out the whole state of Texas. Obviously, the rabbit must have been Crusader Rabbit. Who else would have thought of such a wonderful idea? Now, Crusader Rabbit had big ideals, as you can see. And when he wasn't out on a crusade, he was reading about other bold and fearless men.
So Galahad rescued the fair maiden from the wicked dragon, and they lived happily ever after.
He was probably the smallest rabbit you ever did see, and unfortunately he wasn't endowed with any of the unusual abilities that feature most crusaders.
Oh, yeah?
Well, could he stop a train in full flight with a touch of his hand? No. Could he fly through the air with the greatest of ease? No. Did he have X-ray vision? No. As a matter of fact, he was rather nearsighted.
Is it X, G, R, S, D, U, V?
The only thing Crusader could do when faced with a crisis was to run. Not a very helpful trait for a Crusader, perhaps, but you'll have to admit he developed it to the highest degree. Well, this didn't stop Crusader from having big ideals. He saw himself as sort of a knight in shining armor, and he was always trying to help out other people, other causes. Like the time he tried to make everyday Christmas by nominating Santa Claus for president. Well, to get on with the story, one day Crusader Rabbit was listening to the radio when he heard,
And a good evening, Mr. and Mrs. North America. Let's go to Fritz. Flash, I just received word that the Texans are chasing all of the jackrabbits out of Texas.
jumping grasshoppers, you should have seen Crusader Rabbit. He was off in a flash, heading for Texas to battle the Texans and protect his cousins, all named Jack. All of a sudden, he realized
I might need some help.
he knew he could handle the Texans. They were all singers, but he was worried about their voices. Well, as luck would have it, he was right by a circus at the time, so I went in to find someone who could help him.
No, I'd never be able to talk to him. No, we'll be using swords, not swallowing them.
Then his eye spotted another banner, and he heard the most ferocious-sounding roar. That tiger must really be a monster. This has been a transcribed program. Crusader Rabbit knew he'd found the one to help, so he planned the escape.
Tiger, it is I, Crusader Rabbit. The Texans are chasing my cousins, the jackrabbits out of Texas.
Here they are.
And you've got to help me, Tiger. Will you come with me to battle the Texans?
Here, I'll do it. And so, having persuaded the tiger to join his forces, Crusader Rabbit and his newly found friend were off to Texas to battle the Texans.
So that's Crusader Rabbit. It was mildly successful. It did pretty well. It was a unique novelty, but it didn't necessarily run on Saturday mornings. It ran whatever slot they wanted to put it. Saturday morning cartoons came about because Saturday had traditionally been the time of children. It was an era of radio, was still very popular, and between the hours of 10 to, usually 10 to noon, was radio time for children. I don't know, it doesn't look like too many of you go all the way that back, but you remember tuning in to the Lone Ranger, whatever, that morning, that was your time. So they tried to translate this to television. First to really do this and decide, okay, we're going to try a Saturday morning cartoon, was Terry Toons. Terry Toons had a huge backlog of Mighty Mouse's work, so they pulled that together and packaged it as the Mighty Mouse Playhouse and put it on Saturday mornings. That cartoon ran continuously from 1955 all the way up through 1990. In some variation, Mighty Mouse was on the air. Everything from the original Terry Toons stuff to Filmation, which brought in Heckle and Jekyll, to even Bakshi. Bakshi actually worked on that first Mighty Mouse in the 1950s, where he introduced, later in the series, in the 60s, he introduced his first animated characters that he had created, which you're going to see right now. And then in the 1980s and 90s, he actually bought the rights back to Mighty Mouse, which he'd never owned. He bought them and then ended up producing his own version of Mighty Mouse. So he sort of came full circle. So here he comes to say, oh, I'm sorry, hold on. I jumped ahead to Rough and Ready, sorry. Mighty Mouse is probably next. Rough and Ready was the first cartoon produced specifically for television. Okay? This was actually created for the purpose to run on Saturday morning. So this was the first one to be produced for that specific purpose. Rough and Ready, you'll notice a holdover from Crusader Rabbit, the voice of the narrator. That's because television animation did not pull its premise and outline from movies. It pulled its premise, its actors, its writers from radio. So they had an awful lot of ridiculous exposition. They explained every single thing that was happening in the action because they were still held over from radio. They weren't trusting their audience to be able to read the imagery. Television was still relatively young. This idea of recognizing this imagery on television, people just viewed it as a video radio. So a lot of the voice actors were old radio actors who couldn't quite make it in film, or didn't quite work on screen. So you had some great people who came over. So Rough and Ready. I apologize for the...
Eddie and Dinky were left adrift in the Atlantic. A giant swordfish attacked their rubber raft, but Dinky dumped his trunk in the sea and propelled the raft to land just in time. Later, while Ruff was scouting around in the jungle, a strange pair of eyes followed him. And suddenly, a pair of arms reached out and grabbed poor Ruff. He was tied tightly to a tree, but why? Well, let's see who's up to what right now, shall we?
Well, they've been gone a long time, Reddy.
Maybe found something.
Hey, so maybe it's from my mom.
I'm going to leave it at that so you never know what happened to his mom. Somebody ate him? Probably. But you see a lot of that exposition that they added into sort of just... Dawes Butler had come over from radio, June Foray. Later, people like Stan Freberg would make that leap. And of course, Mel Blanc, who had worked in film cartoons, had made that leap as well, having worked on the Jack Benny program for so many years. So here, as promised, is Mighty Mouse to Save the Day. This was created by Bakshi, thus Diaper Man. Mighty Mouse and the Mighty Heroes. That was in the 1950s, and we're seeing a lot of that happen. By the time you're getting into the late 50s was the rise of Hanna Barbera. Hanna Barbera would really change the industry. They were producing exclusively for, animation for television. They had had their starts doing some feature work with MGM, decided to start their own studio, and they started off really with a great cartoon, Huckleberry Hound. Huckleberry Hound is unique in that it was the first animated television cartoon to have a spin-off. I'm going to see if you can figure out what the spin-off of the show is.
Howdy do you? This is Detective Huckleberry Hound tracking down what's coming up on the show. Well, see here, Maya. What's this? Hi, Pixie. Hi, Dixie.
Hi, Huck.
Well, what's in the box, boys?
A present for James.
I'll take it. I like presents. Well, how about that? A copter cap. I wonder if it works.
Bye-bye, Dixie.
Excuse me, sir. Wait, we met yet. Don't you recognize me, Hook? Not under that disguise, Yogi. You knew, didn't you? Why, sure. You're one of the stars of the show. And the same goes for you, too. Oh, shucks, folks. Everybody's a star on Huckleberry Hound Show, so let's go!
Huckleberry Hound, the spin-off, of course, Yogi the Bear, ended up getting his own show, having really just eclipsed Huckleberry Hound in popularity. He just became such a popular character. The voice, Huckleberry Hound, he actually based it off of Andy Griffith. was the voice he based off of. It was just that time starting to rise in popularity on television. That tradition goes way back in cartoons of them just ripping off voices from already popular characters. Mel Blanc did it, they all did it. Okay? Well, this brings us to one of my all-time favorites, and this is definitely in my top 10 of great Saturday morning cartoons and great theme songs. I loved Underdog. What enabled Saturday morning cartoons to succeed so well is they were able to produce them so incredibly cheap. And the reason that people were willing to accept that is, you know, Disney was producing stuff of a very high quality. It was very expensive to produce Disney. MGM was producing really expensive stuff for the films. Cartoon, animated films had gotten very, very expensive, and the studios just kept making it higher and higher and higher. Really, production had gone through the roof. And then along came UPA. UPA started doing cartoons for the theaters, but they stopped worrying about the backgrounds. They decided it was more important were the characters and the stories, and people wouldn't care if there were no buildings in the background. There were just splotches of color. So they started doing some interesting stuff with Mr. Magoo. I think the best example of what they ended up doing with this is when they started doing Gerald McBoing. If you look at those backgrounds, they're just abstract shapes and colors. So the public began to accept this idea that animation doesn't have to have beautiful rendered backgrounds. We can just focus on the characters. So that really allowed them to make the transition to television to start to work a lot cheaper. The other thing UPA did that was drastic in film was they dropped it from 24 frames per second to 12 frames per second and found out that it didn't matter that much.
What does UPA stand for?
UPA is United Productions Associates. A really lame name is what it is, frankly. But UPA was the one who really started that. Speaking of music and cartoons, we sort of accept that celebrities and cartoons have gone together since the beginning of time. The first Saturday morning cartoon to really be based on living characters was the Beatles.
What you expect with these blinking nippers sitting in my lap? It's no use, John. We can't rehearse these people hanging about. Get out of there, you little rascal. You're really done. Yeah, now. Let's go that electric cord before
It was really poorly animated, but people loved it because it was the Beatles, so it didn't matter. So people looked at the success of the Beatles cartoons, and along comes Filmation. Now, Filmation was a great studio in that they figured out ways to do it even cheaper. They would reuse the same cells over and over. They would reuse the same backgrounds. The backgrounds that were used in Star Trek were later used in He-Man. That gives you an idea how far they were able to stretch the dimes. But they did something interesting. They saw the success of the Beatles, and they said, you know what? Let's find some properties that are just at the point where they're starting to fade, which Filmation was great at. They looked at DC Comics and said, you know, comic books are still popular, but not as popular as they used to be. Let's get the rights to Superman, and let's do an animated cartoon. They did the same thing with Archie, but what they did with Archie that was unique is they saw the success of the Beatles, and they said, let's make the Archies a musical group, okay? This is the first time that an entirely fictional band reached the top 10 on Billboard with the song you're about to hear right now.
And now, the Riverdale Carnival presents the the Archies.
Take care of the kissing booth while we're singing, Sabrina.
Okay, everybody, here we go with our new hit record, Sugar, Sugar.
Which became very, very popular. So much so that networks went to Hanna Barbera and said, you know, how come we don't have a show with a bunch of teenagers? This seems like a great idea. So they came back with a couple different ideas, and finally they decided to find some teenagers who could go around solving mysteries. And thus comes one of the other top 10, I think. Popularity and the reason Filmation and Hanna Barbera started doing these cartoons, these sort of just cutesy little, kid cartoons, and they started to incorporate more of a social message into some of their cartoons, was because at this point, parents groups had really started complaining to the networks. They were still showing old Bugs Bunny cartoons, which were extremely violent, and then shows like Johnny Quest came along, which were extremely violent, and parents were saying, our kids should not be watching this stuff. So they started producing these sort of more family-friendly cartoons with a lot less violent, no guns in them, that sort of thing. And they also started incorporating moral value messages. That was led by Filmation. Filmation could incorporate, they would tag on a message at the end of just about everything, including when they got the rights to Star Trek. Now, one of the things that's really neat about Filmation that they did was, again, they would find a show that had just gone off the air and maybe had just waned in popularity, but still had a little life in it. Star Trek at this point, there weren't fan conventions yet. The show had just gone off the air maybe a year before, but they realized there was still a following. So Filmation came in to Roddenberry and they offered him a fortune if he would be willing to give away the rights and creative control and allow them to create the Star Trek kids. They were going to turn Spock and Captain Kirk into little kids and have them on this spaceship.
Sweet mother of God.
I mean, he was offered a lot of money at a time when his show had just tanked and just there was nothing on the horizon. And he told them, no friggin' way. I am not letting you destroy my show. I will give you rights, but I want creative control. So, they ended up working out the deal. They got the entire cast with the exception of one.
Walter Koenig.
Yes, Walter Koenig. They were not going to use Uhura, but Nimoy refused to do the show without her. So they did. The other thing that's really neat is Jimmy Doohan did more than just his voice. He did about 50 different voices on the show, and if you've ever met him, you know, he was an amazing mimic and impressionist. So they ended up sort of keeping a franchise alive just enough that it ended up becoming the phenomenon. It gave a little bit of a placeholder to it, but not without having to do a lot of public service announcements and having to incorporate a lot of messages into the work to make it educational.
Captain, on the view screen.
It's like a vast Sargasso Sea, a graveyard of ships from every civilization imaginable.
Where are we, sir?
At another place in time, I think. If we check closely, I believe we'll find many of those ships are the ones designated as lost in the Delta Triangle.
An alternate universe?
Something corresponding to that. The records say every ship lost here vanished without a trace. Most logged communication loss and disorientation just before disappearance. My guess was they entered a window to some other continuum. Comments, Spock?
Your logic is excellent, Captain. There is a random factor to the ship disappearances. Perhaps the touching of the two time continuums is erratic. In any event, the window stayed open long enough for us to follow the Clothos in.
Aye, and where is that tricky devil?
I've been scanning for her, but there are so many ships here, it's hard to pick up a specific trace.
Stay on, Mr. Sulu.
Aye, sir.
There are ships here I've only seen crude drawings of. Pictures in museums.
Sensor scans give a rough approximation of the age of the metal in the hulls, Captain. Some of them have been here for centuries.
Captain, there's the old Bonaventure. She was the first ship to have warp drive installed. She vanished without a trace on her third voyage.
The crew's descendants may still be living, Captain.
Their descendants?
Yes. I'm picking up life and energy readings from the cluster of ships ahead of us.
Scanners indicate the Enterprise shields are totally depleted, sir.
Good. All hands to battle stations. Prepare to open fire on the Enterprise immediately.
Captain, the Clothos head ahead.
Sound red alert. Phasers lock on target.
Aye, sir. Base is locked on.
Fire!
Our weaponry is frozen.
Fire.
Firing phasers.
Report, sir.
No response, sir. There's no indication of damage. All instruments register normal.
Wow, dramatic. So you're probably wondering, that didn't have a message. Yes, it did. If you'd have watched the whole cartoon, there was a message at the end about landfills and pollution. Yes, that became a message about landfill because of all the abandoned ships. The Star Trek, this is unique in that the cartoon, they did have to follow the Bible, the Star Trek Bible. They did have to follow a lot of that, but there are two things unique about the series, the animated series. It is the first and one of the only times you do hear Kirk utter the words, "Beam me up, Scotty." He does actually say it in the animated series, and it was the first appearance of the holodeck, which of course had been written into the original series but never used. They did use it in the animated series.
I think it's also the first appearance of a 30-foot Spock, too.
Yes, and a lot of other interesting things in that series.
In the great hall of the Justice League, there are assembled the world's 4 greatest heroes, created for the cosmic legends of the universe. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Aquaman, and those 3 junior super friends, Wendy, Martin, and Wonder Dog.
Yeah, we thought the Wonder Twins were lame.
Their mission, to fight injustice, to right that which is wrong, and to serve all mankind.
Hanna Barbera was evil. Because what they did was, Filmation had really cornered the market on the DC superheroes. They had the first Aquaman show, they did the first Superman show, and they were rotoscoping from the original series. So when they did Batman, Adam West did the voice, and they rotoscoped the series for a lot of the segments. And they used Ted Knight to be sort of the voice of their narrator. Hanna Barbera went to DC and said, we got an idea, we're going to put them all together on this one show if you dump Filmation. And they stole Ted Knight, too, who had been a really good friend of Lou Scheimer's. So that's how they ended up with Super Friends. But really, Filmation were the ones who brought superheroes to animation. Super Friends, again, if you remember it, remember at the end, Wonder Woman had, out of every one of them, they gave Wonder Woman the lamest things to talk about. She was always the one who, like, a little boy helped his grandma cross the street and she would show up. Wow, great job helping your grandma cross the street. Be safe. And that was her whole message. So, I mean, the taglines that they did for their messages were just awful. A much better job of incorporating a value message was Filmation. Who created this show?
It's fun out, and I'm gonna sing a song for you. And Bill's gonna show you a thing or two. You'll have some fun now with me and all the gang, learning from each other while we do our thing.
This is Bill Cosby coming at you with music and fun. If you're not careful, you may learn something before it's done. Hey, hey, hey.
It was one of my favorites, and they really did try and incorporate the message within the show. So they dealt with real inner city issues. It was not the first animated cartoon with an all-black cast. Before it were the Jackson 5, and the first all-black cast, the Harlem Globetrotters. Anybody remember that cartoon?
Yeah.
They had superpowers, and one of the superpowers was the ability to pull anything out of an afro. But it wasn't racist. I don't know if you had this in Canada or not.
Schoolhouse Rocks.
Schoolhouse Rocks. Did you have this in Canada?
Yeah. May not have been in its original run, but we did.
Yeah, but clearly Americans would know nothing of our history without Schoolhouse Rocks. The only reason we know how a bill becomes a law in the United States is because someone had the brilliant mind to animate it. This is definitely one of my top 10. When we opened the ToonSeum, we actually had the composer of all the music actually come and perform to open the ToonSeum. And he is one hell of a jazz musician. It's one of the things I want you, as you're going through these cartoons, really listen to all the music of all these shows. From, you know, the Jetsons all the way through Schoolhouse Rock, jazz, and the music was fantastic. That's a great tradition in animation. So.
Well, every person you can know, and every place that you can go, and anything that you can show, you know their nouns. A noun's a special kind of word. It's a new name you ever heard. I find it quite interesting. A noun's a person, place, or thing. Oh, I took a train to another state. The flora and the fauna that I saw were really great. I saw some bandits chasing the train. I was wishing I was back home again. I took a train to another state. Well, every person you can know, like a bandit or an engineer, and every place that you can go, like a state or a home, and anything that you can show, like animals and plants or a train, you know their nouns. You know their nouns. Oh, Mrs. Jones is a lady on Hudson Street. She sent a dog to bark at my brother and me. We gave her dog a big fat bone, and now he barks at Mrs. Jones. She's a lady, lives on Hudson Street. Well, every person you can know, Mrs. Jones, a lady or a brother, every place that you can go, like a street or a corner, anything that you can show, like a dog or a bone, you know their nouns. You know their nouns. Oh, I took a bird to the Statue of Liberty. My best friend was waiting there for me. He took an early ferry, went for a walk on the island, you know, and in the middle of summer it started to snow, and I took a ferry to the Statue of Liberty. Well, every person you can know, like a friend or the captain of a ship, every place that you can go, an island or a sea, anything that you can show, like a statue, a ferry, or snow, you know their nouns. You know their nouns. Oh, I put it down in the drugstore record machine. Old Nickel started playing the other way I mean. I heard every record he was doing the twist and the Beatles and the monkeys, it goes like this. I put it down in the drugstore record machine. Well, every person you can know, the Beatles and the monkeys, Chubby Checker, every place that you can go, like a neighborhood or a store, and anything that you can show, like a dime or a record machine, you know their nouns. A noun's a special kind of word. It's any name you ever heard. I find it quite interesting. A noun's a person, place, or thing. A noun is a person, place, or thing.
I loved that show. Bob Duro, by the way, was the composer of the form. But you haven't lived, by the way, until you've been in New Orleans and seen that performed in a dirty version by a drag queen. That's one of the great moments in cartoon history. So, let's see what was playing in Saturday CBS Saturday morning. One of the things we loved about cartoons in the United States, and again, this is probably, I hope something they did up here, is that every fall they would actually do whole shows in the evening dedicated to what was going to be on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Yeah,
That's gone.
We got CBS 18 and NBC up here all the time.
Yeah, so you saw a lot of this stuff. Well, these are the bumpers that you would have seen in the cartoons. What's coming up?
Giant CBS Saturday, a modern family lost in time in the Valley of the Dinosaurs. See Bill Cosby, Fat Albert, and all the Cosby Kids. See Superflix on the CBS Children's Film Festival.
Wow, looks exciting. Let's see what was going on.
Join the fun with Casper the Friendly Ghost with his special friends the Angels and Harry Scary. Then there are laughs galore when Fred and Barney meet the Thing.
Okay, I have to pause it right there. We are at this point now beginning to see the decline of Saturday morning cartoons. Two things began to happen as we entered the 80s, and that was you took any licensed character you could find and paired them up with the most ridiculous characters you could think of. So not only did you have the Flintstones paired with the Thing, I didn't even know where you put that in the Marvel canon. But
rocks.
Yeah, that was it. That was the whole logic. They also put Casper the Friendly Ghost with Charlie's Angels in space. When you ran out of everything else, the reaction of the studio was, well, why don't you try it in space? There actually was a show called Gilligan's Planet. Okay, there really was. And that was, if all else failed, try it in space. Okay, back to our Super Globetrotters. Now watch. Watch for the powers that they show you.
Super Globetrotters.
Beautiful.
Followed by the incredible new Schmoo. Saturday morning.
Shmoo was an Al Cap. It's the only character they pulled out a little apple.
Saturday, march into a whole new lineup.
What else?
Starting with the original Cat and Mouse game on the Tom and Jerry Show. Next, it's 90 minutes of classic cartoon and comedy on the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Show. Then, ride into high excitement on the Tarzan Lone Ranger Adventure.
Perfect together.
And all new Popeye Hour. Catch it Saturday.
The California Raisins. The Muppet Babies.
Yeah, what?
Pee-wee's Playhouse. Come on. Garfield and Friends. Saturday.
Okay. So, what did they present for us? So, I'm going to get this in a second. So, we're starting to see, we saw a sort of a downturn in animation for a little bit in the 80s. And then it started to pick back up again because they started refocusing. They said, look, we're losing track. We're just making it all about the characters. We're not making this about the stories. We need to go back and find some really good stories that they haven't seen in the U.S., that haven't been overdone. We've done all the comic book stuff, the superhero stuff. Where can we go? So Hanna Barbera sort of led the way with that. And then the Smurfs led into Mr. T. So just when it started looking good, like maybe cartoons are going to turn around, we entered the vanity age of animation. Mr. T, my favorite, and I don't have it on here, is Chuck Norris, which starts out, The Chuck Norris Show, starring Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is Chuck Norris in Chuck Norris.
Quiet, peaceful, serene.
But you were doing some good stuff too up here.
Oh, yes.
Luckily, he has some good friends to help him out.
What is that? Why is it naked?
Except for Cyril Sneer. And his life would be simple except for the raccoons.
Did so well that it got bought by Disney. The raccoons got bought by Disney, and they tried to import it into the U.S. and anywhere they could, and it just didn't catch on. It just didn't do as well. And then they actually brought in their animators to work on it, and that's sort of when it started to fade. What was Filmation doing?
And the masters of the universe. I am Adam, Prince of Eternia, defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull."
By the way, that's exactly what Bruce Simon said when he cut the ribbon at the ToonSeum.
Cringer became the mighty Battle Cat, and I became He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Only 3 others share this secret. Our friends, the Sorceress, Man-at-Arms, and Orko. Together we defend Castle Grayskull from the evil forces of Skeletor.
Now, as great as those shows were, they did usher in a new era in animation on Saturday mornings, and that was the 30-minute commercial. These shows were all toys first and shows second. So you had Care Bears, which had been greeting cards and stuffed animals. You had Strawberry Shortcake. You had a whole era, you know, the toy companies come to animation cartoons. G.I. Joe just saying, hey, can you make a cartoon based on our toy? Transformers.
Yeah, so much of the Hasbro stuff.
All the Hasbro, all of this.
Wasn't that part of it due to legislative changes in the U.S. as well that allowed it?
No, it had always been allowed. It had been frowned upon. It was after this that it became no longer allowed. What the legislation became was you could not run commercials for a product that was during that show. So after this, you weren't allowed to run, G.I. Joe is what led to the legislation, you weren't allowed to run ads for G.I. Joe toys during G.I. Joe. Because they said kids couldn't separate what they were. So.
Attention, the dragon tribe!
Yes! Great. Even games became cartoons.
Where are we?
Roller Crit. There's a
Look out!
Ranger, Barbarian, Magician, Thief, Cavalier, and Acrobat.
Parents were really unhappy with this cartoon because along with the game itself, this was going to send all our American children to hell. So it was sort of this where they said, okay, this is going really, really far. And then you just had more toys on cartoons. And really once you hit that, you know, it's becoming about the market. There was, however, some that sort of came out of the rises in the 90s. Right before the downfall of animation, you had Disney Block. This is really a golden age of television animation. Barton Duck, Gummy Bear, the fantastic DuckTales, going back to the Karl Barks stories. But they then bought their own network. They moved all their stuff off of ABC onto their own network. Cable began to rise after this. Saturday mornings began to fade.
The secret of gummy berry juice. The legend is growing. They take pride in knowing they fight for what's right in whatever they do. Gummy bears, crossing here and there and everywhere. Honey badger and beyond compare. They are the gummy bears. They are the gummy bears.
Disney brought back the 24 frames per second. They brought back the, you know, going with more detailed backgrounds. They focused on story, they focused on characters, because they weren't marketing specific toys, they were marketing the entire Disney brand. And they took over for a long time on Saturday mornings, but then they decided not only did they want to have one Saturday morning, they wanted to have Disney afternoons, and then eventually had enough material to do what they planned all along, their own network. So you had the rise of cable. I'm not entirely convinced that is what killed Saturday mornings when cable rose. I do think there was something else that helped kill it. Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky killed Saturday morning animation. I hold you all responsible.
He already left Canada by this point.
Yeah. What actually had happened was Chuck Norris, Mike Woodward, all this celebrity animation made it really expensive. Not because the animation quality went up, but because celebrities demanded exorbitant amounts to produce cartoons based on their licensed image. So the cost of animation suddenly got very, very high. More and more celebrities were getting into animation because it was easy work. They didn't even have to give their voice pretty much. They could have an impersonator. They just had to do a 5-second live action segment to insert it.
It's all about helping.
So certainly this isn't what killed animation, but it didn't help. There is one show though, that when you talk to historians that we pinpoint as saying this was the end of Saturday morning cartoons, because it brought back live action. And once live action came back to children's television in a big way, it became very popular, it did two things. It erased that young demographic, little kids, and focused on tweens and teens, okay? The other thing it did was they realized they could pay these young nobody actors less than it costs to produce animation now. And so, this is really what Saved by the Bell's popularity proved to NBC that live action was the way to go. And so that's exactly what happened. They ended up switching over to live action, and Saturday mornings were gone. I'm going to stop. It's too painful to watch for me. I became very good friends, as it turns out, with Carl Kurlander, who I later found out was he's been the writer of St. Elmo's Fire, and he's from Pittsburgh. And we had been talking about his life and career, and one of his big things was he was one of the creators of Saved by the Bell. So I keep meaning to bring him into the ToonSeum to defend his actions for killing Saturday morning.
Or take him out.
Or take him out for doing it. So that's sort of just a quick overview. Now certainly, what that led to, again, is that live action coming. NBC decided to drop most of their cartoons and did more and more live action. By the time Saved by the Bell, the Hawaiian years, or whatever the heck they were doing, where I'm from in the United States, NBC had switched over to all Saturday morning news, which really, that was it. So a combination of the cable, rise of cable, the high cost of animation, and the low cost of live action is what led to Saturday morning animation's demise. And thankfully now, though, we can watch any show we want on cable. So that's my presentation on the return to Saturday mornings. We do hope they will come back to the museum.
Some of the classics, like Roger Ramjet.
There's a lot of stuff I left out. Believe me, I could have done 6 days of this.
And what is that for?
Yeah. Come on down to the ToonSeum and you can see a lot of this original art. We do have, a lot of the art I chose is stuff that we actually have in our collection. We have a very large collection, in particular of Fat Albert and all the filmation stuff too, and of Super Friends. So that's one of the reasons I chose stuff too, was that stuff I loved and knew. Any questions? I have maybe like 4 or 5 minutes for questions. Yes?
What's your opinion on the resurgence of old cartoon identities, like the remake of Transformers, the remake of Turtles, being old cartoons to live action movies?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There are 2 ways to go when your initial audience gets of a certain age, about 40. There are 2 directions. You can go the direction of they want to share this with their children now, so let's bring back the Smurfs as a movie, or let's bring back these characters. The other direction is to go sort of the Adult Swim direction, which is, hey, let's take these characters and say what these kids always thought all along, that Scooby-Doo was a big pothead. So those are the 2 directions you end up going, is either taking something you cherish in childhood and making it appeal to you as an adult, or taking it and making it appeal to your children so you can share it. So I think it's good in that it is reintroducing a lot of this work to people who may have never seen it, especially the kids. So it's new audiences. So I don't have a problem with it. I don't think you have to take every new character has to visit New York. I really think the Smurfs could have worked in the Smurf Village. I don't think you need to take them anywhere. So, but overall, I think it's a good thing. Yes?
Where do you see the future of animation going as far as censorship in, like when it's presented in mass media? Like, just as an example, the only viewings of the old Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes cartoons that we get here in Canada are on Teletoon, ones that were heavily edited in the 90s, where, you know, the Tasmanian Devil doesn't eat the wild turkey surprise, it simply disappears when he's angry.
Yeah, political correctness has done a lot of damage to cartoons. On the other hand, cartoons were really, really bad. Having watched a lot of them, I mean, the racism in cartoons was
Johnny's
terrible.
Question is a good one.
Terrible.
Oh, can we keep them?
On the other hand, you know, we can't ignore our history. We do have to look at it. So I think the only solution to that is for academics and for museums to start to give a context to this material. And I have been seeing that. I know when Warner Brothers re-released a lot of the classic cartoons unedited, they had Whoopi Goldberg do the intro apologizing for America. Which makes it all okay. As long as you have, you know, an African-American celebrity speak first and say, hey, they were bad, but then it's all okay in the United States. My bigger concern is always the resurgence of the outcry over not racism or political correctness, but just it's too violent, or we just don't like it, or they attack Scientology.
So it gets very easy for that kind of thing to happen. Like,
it does get very good to happen. I think there will always be an outcry. As far as it swings the other way, we have to keep pushing it further and further. Simpsons pushed it pretty far, and then, you know, Family Guy pushed it further, and then South Park pushed it. They think is over the edge. I don't think it is over the edge yet.
They're still pushing, so.
And on behalf of the entire United States, we do apologize for the whole Blame Canada thing. And they nominated it for an Oscar. Go for it. So,
don't worry, you get mad, we'll just cut off your power.
So I think it's an ebb and flow, and I think we'll continue to see it, but I think we'll always see those who rebel against it. Any other questions? I got time for maybe one more, because we do have to go on. All right. Great. Well, I hope to see you. I'll be at the booth signing my mazes, which is the other thing I do. And then tomorrow I'll be doing my performance of storytelling with live cartoon illustration. Thank you all very much.